and some of you I already know, like I know Miss Zheng. When she joined one of my project, I know her advisor, and now she will present. And Fahidehi, I know from cultural landscape, and then I also I also a member of ICO4. So Professor Shika, yes, yes, very welcome. Although I cannot join the ICO4 symposium that in Wednesday, sorry, but Milagros will join us in next week. She will come to Taiwan. Yes.
Nice.
And, yes. Yeah. So we will start maybe in 2 minutes, and our staff will when they okay, they will send a message to me, and we will start our webinar. But first off, they will ask us to have a picture, and then we can start our presentation. And here is we can start from Guo Yiru. Yes, yes. So 怡汝那边有听到声音吗？有 ，OK， 好。And then our second speaker will 郑思文。Yes. And the third speaker will Shika Chen. Yes. And our last speaker will Jose Victor Torres. Yes. Thank you very much. Okay. And our commenter, Faidehi Lavender. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will start now. OK， 各位在线上的朋友，大家好。我是
Online viewers from around the world. My name is Wang. I am an associate professor at the Graduate Institute of Folk Arts and Cultural Heritage, National Taipei University. I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar. We have experts and practitioners from Taiwan, the Philippines, and India joining us today to share their experience and expertise with viewers from around the world. Today, we will hear from case studies from Taiwan, from Kinmen and Tainan. We will also be hearing the newly inscribed UNESCO site, Maratha military landscapes of India, and we will also learn from the case studies of the walled district of Intramuros, Manila. Before we begin today's first presentation, I would like to invite everyone to join us in group photo shooting. Please turn on your camera and join us in group photo shooting.
1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Thank you. And then we will start our first speech. Our first speech will be by the 郭怡汝。那怡汝你可以先分享你的简报吗？
Now we would like to ask our first presenter to start sharing her slides. Ms. Guo is a postgraduate researcher in museum studies, University of Leicester. She will talk about memories of war, how wartime candy can be reinterpreted and translated into a museum exhibition. She will talk about wartime memories and how such collective memories can be turned into inspiration for an engaging and interactive museum exhibition. In fact, Ms. Guo used to work in the museum sector. After years of service, she is now studying for her PhD degree at the University of Leicester. She specializes in difficult heritage as well as heritage preservation and community engagement. She was also the director of the Kinmen Folk Cultural and History gallery. Now, I would turn it over to Miss Guo.
Distinguished guests, friends online, good afternoon. I am Guo Yiru, and I'm very happy to share with you through a museum how we are able to translate these memories from war into a curation, into an exhibition. So I'm Guo Yiru, and I'm currently a postgraduate researcher in museum studies at the University of Leicester. So my specialty is in museum studies and also war memories and military heritage. I'm also an author, and I manage a fans page, a fans page. And I've also worked at the Kinmen History and Folk Museum. So this is the outline of my talk. There are 5 parts. First, we'd like to discover the Kinmen and the Kinmen History and Folklore Museum. And then I'm going to give you a historical context of the cross-strait tensions. How come Kinmen has accumulated these memories in the battlefield. And then I'm going to share with you what is the so-called yummy candy or delicious candy, and also how these memories were transformed into an exhibition. So when you think of Kinmen, what comes to your mind? Kinmen is very interesting. It's actually a bit distant from Taiwan. It takes 1 hour by flight, but it's very close to China. It only takes 30 minutes between Xiamen and Kinmen. And because of its unique geopolitical situation, it has a very rich military heritage. For example, a lot of military structures. Here you can see this is during the Guningtou battlefield. Battle, and now it is a memorial park. It also has these retired tanks. And in Kinmen, there are a lot of fortifications and also fortresses. Like this is a vessel-shaped fortress. And here there are these slogans that lift the morale of the military. These are one of the very common military forts. And then fortifications. This is a very famous Jiaishan Tunnel. It is also a water channel used during wartime. And then during Cold War, Kinmen was the hotspot of these tensions. So this is the very famous tower that was bombed and also occupied by the PLA during the Guningtou battle. So here, this is a Western building, but you can see a lot of bullet holes. And also, if you travel to Kinmen, you can see all these different slogans, military-related slogans. So the entire Kinmen Islands, you see military heritage spread across the entire island. There are fortifications, fortresses, tunnels. There are many military structures that are easily visible throughout the island of Kinmen. And for people of Kinmen, these are the memories of their past, and this also forms their identity. So that's a brief background of Kinmen. And now I'm going to introduce to you the only official museum, the official history museum in Kinmen. And this is where the exhibition that I've curated took place. So here, this is the exterior of the museum. It has a big plaza. It's Mingnan architecture style, and there are these art installations at the plaza. And then this is the entrance of the museum. So here, this History and Folklore Museum, it showcases the history of Kinmen. It is also a very important site for tourists to come and understand the history. It covers the past, the present, the history, the culture of Kinmen, including its military heritage. So here, the museum, it identifies itself as a very important site to pass down the memories, cultures, and history of Kinmen. It It also emphasizes the ties between history and the people who live in Kinmen, and also allowing the tourist to delve deeper into this collective history of Kinmen. We have oral history, we have different relics and also aspects of history preserved in this museum. So one of this very special exhibition on delicious candy. This is this exhibition that I would like to share with you. But before I introduce to you what is yummy candy, delicious candy, I would like to share with you first this collective history of Kinmen.
Earlier, we talked about that Kinmen is an anti-communist stronghold of Taiwan. Its history is characterized by cross-strait confrontation, and such battlefield everyday life has left an indelible impression on people's memories, especially those people who lived through those times. A little bit of background of the post-World War II confrontation across the Taiwan Strait. In 1949, the nationalist troops boarded ships at Shanghai and withdrew to Taiwan. And because of proximity of the Kinmen Island, which literally is a few kilometers away from mainland China, it has become a stronghold for the anti-communist campaigns and a lot of military drills and exercises. It is exactly because of such geopolitical importance that Kinmen has become the front line and what people call the peaceful fortress of the Taiwan Strait conflict. And over the years, there have been many battlefields, including the Gunintou in 1949 and the A23 battle in 1953. And then the most important of those is the A23 artillery bombardment in 1958. There have been constant artillery bombardment from China, missiles falling from the sky for a total of 44 days. There were no longer nighttime. The nighttime sky were lit by these bombardment activities. And there were before a peace treaty was reached, the people were living in fear. Since the truce was intermittent and there were shellings constantly, here is a photo of residential houses that had been completely destroyed by the artillery bombardment back in the post-World War II era. And during the period of military administration, Kinmen residents faced food shortages and rationing of daily supplies. There was severe shortages of daily necessities, and people on Kinmen, including the nationalistic party, all relied on U.S. foreign aid for survival and their daily needs. As you can see that here, the local government is distributing supplies from the United States. And back at the time, candy was a rarity and a luxury. This is a look inside of a grocery store in Kinmen during the 1960s. You could see that there is apparently military supplies. So on the left-hand side, the photo shows you a military personnel-only grocery store. And on the right-hand side, it gives you a glimpse into a regular grocery store that mainly sells canned food. It's far from very different from the grocery stores that we see today because food would have to be preserved in cans back at the time. And it is exactly at this time and the shortages of resources and food that gave rise to a beloved traditional Kinmen dessert that was once made from very simple ingredients. They were sold by street vendors, and such candy was made from sugar, maltose, and peanut powder. And it was not just only a sweet treat, but also part of the local life. And then whenever such street vendor walks down the street, he would make noises by banging a metal knife against a recycled metal can. Like I said, this Kinmen dessert was made from simple ingredients. sugar maltose, and the ground peanut powder, and it could be purchased with cash. And many residents, especially children, still remember to this day exchanging recyclable glass bottles, cans, or old metal pieces for a tiny little piece of the yummy candy. This simple barter system made the treat a cherished part of the childhood memories. And as you can see, the people at the time were collecting metal cans, scrapes, metal scraps, just to trading, sometimes for cash, and sometimes for a tiny little piece of candy, such as shown in the slide. Especially for children at the time, they could never afford a large piece of candy. They would approach a street vendor, such as this old gentleman in the photo, and show him what they have in their hand in exchange for a tiny, tiny piece of candy. So the artillery bombardment eventually stopped temporarily. There were bombardments on odd-numbered days, not on even-numbered days, so people were finally relieved. However, the martial law, the military administration continued. And after the martial law was lifted, many bans were lifted, when it comes to food shortages, when it comes to military fortresses, as well as the different aspects of life. As we said, this local treat, dessert, can be purchased not just with cash, but are also recycled materials such as copper, tin, and things like that. Back at the time, during the post-World War II period, many people have pots and pans made from iron or even aluminum. Some children would actually collect shellings from the field and in exchange for a piece of sweet candy. And soldiers often rushed to the firing range in the dark or before dawn to scramble for shell casings in order to trade them in exchange for a piece of candy. And we also know that when children were young and had no allowance, they would want something to eat. And during the bombardment, there were a lot of shell casings that landed on the island. So whether it's the local soldiers, whether it's local residents or children, would then collect these shell casings because they contain a high density of copper, and they would exchange them for candy. And as a child, people used to collect also glass bottles near the military camp, picking up the soda bottles left by the soldiers after they have finished drinking, and they would turn in the metal shell casings after the soldiers have finished a practice or shooting. And then sometimes the children would even go through the house. They would rummage through the house to look for the tiniest piece of metal in order to trade it in for a piece of candy. And then children would then, in fact, on purpose, break the wash basin, the metal wash basin, to trade it in with candy salesperson for some delicious candy. Like I said, glass bottles near the military camp, picking up soda bottles left by the soldiers. And these were all common practices. And even the soldiers themselves wanted a piece of the yummy candy. After the shooting practice, they were rushed to the firing range, trying to beat each other to the firing range to scramble for shell casings. And of course, sometimes accidents happen. During our collection of oral history, one person that we interviewed, that his friend went to the firing range to pick up shell casings and ended up finding actually one tiny bomb that actually did not explode. After picking it up, it was triggered and exploded and harmed the children. The child eventually lost his life. So all these memories were taking place due to the military activities that went on for decades on the Kinmen Island. When the salesperson of such yummy candy, when the salespeople make their way down the street, children, soldiers, and residents scramble and take to the streets, and going through their houses scrambling for resources that could be traded in exchange for the yummy candy. And this yummy candy, or what people call the hochi candy, is a symbol of wartime life experiences, and it actually belongs to the broader category of military heritage. So that's the first point I would like to highlight today. Second, and the collective memory of delicious yummy candy or hochi candy reveals the cultural life of civilians in wartime, challenging the historically dominant narrative focused simply on military actions. It also enhances the gaps in military and brand historical narratives with civilian wartime experiences. Such gaps can be bridged, and its reuse or reactivation of wartime memories makes the intangible war-stricken childhood and living culture visible and comprehensible cultural resources. So in a way, the yummy candy really lies at the core of the broader category of military heritage and people's collective memory on the island. So we decided to turn that or reinterpret it as an inspiration for our museum exhibition. So the first stage, we decided to engage people who were directly engaged with the sales of the yummy candy. So we were able to locate the gentlemen that were selling the candy on the street. We were also working with the local historians and researchers. So we conducted an in-depth literature review and research in the first stage. In fact, this candy is no longer available today. It has these candy salespeople have retired over 1 decade ago. So all the tools would have to be remade, and we would have to conduct really extensive research in order to talk to those people who were selling the candy in the market. And then we actually were able to locate a gentleman. However, he was suffering from dementia. He was only able to talk about his memories. He wasn't able to make the candy within our museum gallery. However, we were able to make such records of how the candy was made, of how to make such a very, very authentic yummy candy. And then we were also collecting videos and historic photos. And the local residents also participated. One of them provided this wooden cart on which we could place the plates, the metal plates and the tools for making candy. One of the most important aspects of the candy is, in fact, the knives and the cans and the cutting board for making the candy, which is no longer available. So we were able to locate a local ironsmith, and the owner of this ironsmith shop was able to look at the historic photo and he was able to replicate the metal knives and the metal trays that people used to use and utilize for making the yummy candy. And he didn't charge us 1 penny. He basically said that you're doing something good, and he really was proud to be part of the campaign. And he was really, really passionate about preserving this collective memory. As you can see, this exhibition area only occupies a small corner of the gallery. We not only make the candy within the gallery, we're also showing historic photos, text panels. There's also video and audio recording of the oral history provided by the local residents. We relied on our professional training. We had very dedicated staff to interview the local residents in order to put together this really engaging and interactive exhibition. As you could see on the upper right corner, we were able to really replicate the candy and share the candy with those who visited the museum. So for us, it is very important to be able to use the cultural material to reactivate the memories of the delicious candy, and through collective documentation and reinterpretation, we transformed personal memories, oral histories into shared cultural resources, deepening emotional connections to wartime history and self-identity. Many people gave their gave their account of the artillery bombardment, of collecting artillery shell casings, of going out in the field, collecting glass bottles and metal pieces. When these were turned into the narratives within the museum, we are able to promote understanding and empathy between different generations, and it gave us the opportunity to allow wartime experience to continue within families and communities, becoming a bridge for inheritance and dialogue, especially for the young people today, the young children today, especially for those who had never experienced life on a remote island such as Kinmen. This is very precious memory they are also interested in learning about. And it is also about reactivating memory into exhibitions and educational practices, transforming historical reenactment into public reflection. So when we talk about the preservation of military heritage, it is not just about fixing, renovating the actual building. It is about reactivating wartime memories and showcasing their contemporary value, making that emotional connection between different communities. Sometimes when you put things in a wall panel, it becomes static, and this was not our intention. This is just the beginning. For us, this memory really was able to turn display into a community dialogue. This special exhibition was put on during the Chinese New Year holiday period, when a lot of people who have left the island to work in Taiwan or big cities would then return. So these younger generation would then return to their hometown, and there's something for them to talk about. They will visit the special exhibition, which incorporates local participation and experience sharing, and it helps to promote intergenerational communication and foster a sense of identity. And we also had this campaign, A Piece of Candy for a story. So people could come in and tell us their personal story, whatever it may be. And in exchange, they will receive a piece of the hochi or yummy candy. And in the end, during the second stage of our exhibition, we invited a different residents to come in. We were able to give away 300 pieces of the yummy candy. And then there were many elderly members of the community who came in. They would talk about their wartime memories, how they were struggling to survive during the post-World War II period. And such interaction really is a very precious memory, symbolizes our efforts to guide the audience from everyday experiences in war zones to appreciate the fragility and preciousness of peace. And this also provides a platform for mutual participation. It reactivate wartime memory, and it also is a best example of reusing and reactivating wartime memory and the military heritages.
And in the end of the exhibition, we also wanted to encourage the audience to reflect upon their battlefield memories, but also about the meanings of peace. So we encourage the visitors to envision their ideal for peace, and especially during the Lunar New Year Festival. With this exhibition, we hope Kinmen residents can look back to their childhood memories, and the younger Kinmen residents, the younger generation, the children, they can learn from the oral history. They can also be brought back to those years of war. And in doing so, they can cherish the peace even more. So here, sugar, candy, this is a symbol of that particular era when all kinds of resources were really scarce, but people had hope. People carried hope and moved forward. So through this very daily life exhibition, we wanted to share these meanings with the visitors, and we also hope to convey these messages. We want to reactivate the war memories, retranslate the war memories, and also connect with contemporary values. It's a very small exhibition, but it's not just about the past. It is also a reinterpretation process. We've included the stories of the local residents. We are able to revitalize these war memories. And in doing so, we can preserve and reinterpret local memories. People can better understand these memories. We can also form this community identity and also foster these emotional connections. A lot of the Kinmen residents have moved to Taiwan, and through this exhibition, we hope to reconnect these Kinmen residents back to the land where they grew up. Secondly, this exhibition aims to foster intergenerational emotional connections and also community dialogues. The younger generations, they don't have much experience with war when they were born. They were born in peacetime. But through these oral sharing of the elderly, the younger generation, they get to foster, they get to grow and develop this connection with their families and with the seniors. And this is intergenerational legacy passing down, even though the younger generations did not experience war. And also the history is no longer just stagnant in the past or in the museum. It's passed down and shared in families, in communities. And in doing so, the war memories, the war heritage in Kinmen is no longer the static and cold. It is something that could be passed down, that could be reactivated. So the reactivation of these memories and to reinterpret these memories to bring out the contemporary values, this is a really important goal for our exhibition. And this is the public reflection that we hope to create. Through this exhibition, we get to understand the past history, we understand the vulnerability of peace and also the cost, the price of war. And we can also understand the hope and resilience within people. So here, we are not just bringing back our past history, it's also fostering some kind of discussion about war, about peace, and about the life we have now. So this exhibition, strictly speaking, it's really non-conventional. It is not just about these very tangible military structure. It is intangible. It's about collective memories of the past. But for us, from the museum's perspective, this is also another way, an extension of revitalizing military heritage. And through this exhibition, we get to understand that the reuse or revitalization of military heritage goes beyond repair, repurposing of tangible entities. It's also about legacy. It's a dynamic process. It's about community dialogues. And in doing so, we hope we can bring these past histories into public discussion. We can help preserve military heritage, promote community dialogues, and also address contemporary society's concerns for peace. So this concludes my exhibition. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you, Izhu, for sharing from this yummy candy, from this memory of tasting the candy. We get to understand the life during wartime, and I'm very grateful to your sharing. Later on, we also have a panel discussion, and our moderator, our commentator, will be raising further questions. Next, we'd like to invite our second speaker, so Siwen. So Siwen is currently a PhD student in architecture in NCKU. And I know her advisor quite well. So Siwen works a lot in cultural heritage preservation. The team that Siwen belongs to, they are working on the Fort Zelandia and also city, the historical context. They've also been working with other Southeast Asian cities with similar histories. So now we're going to invite Siwen. Siwen, make sure that you have your slide on. So Siwen, the topic of Suwon from colonial fortress to local site, the historical context and cultural reinterpretation of Fort Zelandia and city. So in the past, we only talk about the fort, but there's also the cityscape, the city of Zelandia. And this is an area that Suwon has worked for many years. So we're looking forward to her sharing. And let's now listen to Suwon's presentation.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for having me, and my name is Zhen Siwen, and I'm very glad to be here today to share my presentation. This topic is actually part of a long-term project that I have been working on with my professor and our research team for almost 8 years. And today I will focus on Fort Zelandia City, which was built by the Dutch East India Company in Taiwan, and covering its historical background and recent academic discoveries. Okay, and so my presentation today will be divided into 4 parts. First, I will talk about Fort Zelandia and the city within the context of the Dutch East India Company. Then I will give a short overview of previous study, and that I will share our recent research findings. And finally, I will talk about how these findings have been reinterpreted and translated into different cultural and public contexts in recent years. So let's start with the first part. As we know, during the 17th and 18th centuries, the Dutch company built a complex trade network across the Asian and occupied many port cities. The company's headquarters was in Batavia, which is known as Jakarta today. The goods from all over Asia were shipped there, and where the headquarters decide which would be sent back to Europe and which would continue to be traded within Asia. And Taiwan played an important role in this network. It served as a transit hub for trade between Japan and Chinese merchants. So in 1624, the company built one of its farthest forts here, and it's called Fort Zelandia, which marked the moment when Taiwan was first connected to the global trade system. Besides Fort Zelandia, the Dutch company also built hundreds of forts across Asia. And if you first time to see these forts, many of them look quite similar. But if we look more closely at their relationship to the surrounding landscape, their scale, their form, and materials, we can see they are shared some principle and local difference. On a large scale, these forts were usually built at river mouths or along coastline, making it easier for Dutch ships to move and trade. And we often see a pattern, fort, square, and city, with the square often featuring a gallows. It's symbolizing colonial authority and control. And in terms of form, most forts follow a square plan with bastions, and some were directly connected to city walls, but some were not. And the cities themselves usually followed a grid layout, showing the Dutch emphasis on order and planning. And from this, we can see that these forts and cities were built according to a shared planning logic. And now let's return to Fort Zelandia in Taiwan. This image, drawn in the 1650s, shows Fort Zelandia along the Dayuan sandbank. You can clearly see the screen of fort, square, and city, with the city also following a grid pattern. But Fort Zelandia was more complex than other Dutch forts in Southeast Asia. It developed in stages. It started as a small fort without a city, but as the site became more important, both the fort and city expanded over time. And This is drawing from 1644. It shows that the fort has 3 levels: an upper main fort, a lower fort, and an outer fort, all following the square plan with bastions. This kind of multi-layered structure is truly unique among Dutch forts in Asia. So, from a military perspective, Fort Zelandia was exceptional within the company's fortification system. And for Taiwan, it was not only the place that connected the island to global trade, but also the starting point of its urban development. Yeah. And when we talk about early modern fortress, there are 2 main design systems we should know: the Italian Renaissance bastion system and the French Faubourg system. These models shape early modern fortification design in both geometry and engineering in Europe. Dutch military architecture was strongly influenced by them, but as these ideas spread across Asia, they were adapted and transformed in local context. In Southeast Asia, these designs involve even further adapting to tropical climates, local materials, and different enemies. By combining Western military planning with local materials and environmental knowledge, the Dutch created a kind of hybrid colonial defense style in Asia. So rather than viewing Asian forts as simplified version of European models, we should see them as part of a regional fortress system, what we might call the Southeast Asian fortress system in the colonial context. And today, Fort Zelandia and city now from the core of Anping district in Tainan, and over 400 years ago, through different colonial regimes, this fortress has been rebuilt and reinterpreted many times, transforming from a relic of colonial history into a central part of Tainan's identity. And this video was captured by our research team. You can see the Fort Zelandia historical site today. And just last year, 2024, Tainan launched Tainan 400. Sorry. Marking 400 years since the founding of Fort Zelandia and city by the Dutch. It engaged in multiple sectors and the wider public. It's different events, but all under the Tainan 400 theme. If you look closely at the blue poster in the upper right, there is a blueprint of an old Dutch system fortress. This is an interesting example of how military heritage is being reimaged as a symbol of civic unity. Oh, so 好像不是，sorry. Oh. Okay, let me continue. And so, yeah, and next. Today, Fort Zelandia is going beyond its purely colonial or military image. being re-embraced as a symbol of local identity and community connection. This change shows a move away from top-down official events. Local residents are now starting many projects and cultural activities on their own. This strong local involvement marks a big change in how we understand and manage this historical site. And now let's take a quick look at previous academic studies. The study of the Dutch period in Taiwan actually began during the Japanese colonial era. Ahead of the 1930 Taiwan Cultural Anniversary hosted by the Japanese government, the extensive archaeological surveys were conducted across the Dutch-built forts. They also renovated Fort Zelandia, including building a lookout tower, a museum, and redesigning the red brick plaza. This project largely shaped the appearance of the site as we see it today. And in 1993, after Fort Zelandia was named the National Historical Site, the Tainan City government asked architect Zheng Guoen to create a full restoration plan. The task was difficult because there is only a few original structure was left, and therefore his team had to depend on the reconstruction plan made during the Japanese era. They used different pavement to show the fort's layout. It's like a symbolic act, but it based on what they thought rather than what was proven. So, as a result, today's researchers must handle this added layer of past ideas very carefully. And the next major step came in 2003. The Tainan City government then engaged NCKU research team to restore this historical site. This was a real team effort, scholars from archaeology, architecture, and engineering. They all worked side by side, excavating 7 trenches. This excavation uncovered Dutch period bricks and foundations. Even though most of what they found was put back underground for preservation, this project created a strong base for all the research we do today. And in terms of urban planning, the first modern plan appears in 2006, the Tainan Anping Harbor Historical Landscape Plan. Its main goal was to guide development while preserving historical identity. It covered both Fort Zelandia and the surrounding city, and set the direction for future cultural renewal. And the next came into 2022. The city government asked NZKU's urban planning team to create a more detailed plan for Anping's historical district, guided by the historical sites organized. The team mapped out heritage zones and importantly, they tried to listen to local feedback. And crucially, the plan put a big focus on working with the community. They even often offer rewards for restoring old house, and this marked a new era of preservation driven by the people who live here. And now that we have covered the planning side, let's turn to research. Over the scholars have made major progress in studying the Dutch period in Taiwan, mostly by translating and analyzing original Dutch documents into Japanese, English, and Chinese. These include the Zendia diaries, government records from Batavia, letters from company directors, and several travel accounts. Without this translated material, none of our modern research would have been possible. And this brings us to our project. Our research was divided into two main parts. The first is starting in 2017, is focused on reconstructing the city. The second, from 2019, focused on the fortress. Study of Zelandia city actually began with an interesting story. While a scholar, Menno Lenscher, was searching the Dutch National Archives for records about the dodo birds, and he found a piece of old paper filled with numbers and marked with a big cross. After checking it with Professor Paulus, they realized it was the 1643 land record of Zelandia city. This document was then given to Taiwanese scholars Zhong Weizhong and Professor Huang Enyu, who began reconstructing the city's historical layout and figuring out who lived here. And as we can see, this paper is really clear. It shows the size of land, the land on which street, and who is owner. So, by using this key record, our first step was drawing out the original street lines. We look at the data using the old Dutch way of measuring. Then we spent 2 months visiting the site to look for any old physical pieces that maybe were still there. And during field work, we found some great proof, like we found the temple inscription. It records that during the temple's reconstruction, they found a brick wall under the ground, actually like the fort remains. And it was right where we guessed the cemetery would be. We also saw the width of the buildings hasn't changed much since the 17th centuries. And after all, we combine all these informations and overlay them on modern and Japanese era maps. Then we finally reconstruct the city plan as it looked in the 1640s. And from this study, we could also identify who lived here. Inside the city, there were Dutch company officials, other foreigners, and many Chinese and Japanese merchants. We also noticed the land controlled by Chinese merchants within the city. What we found was even back in the 17th century, some Chinese were already holding multiple plots of ground. This also shows the settlement was more than just a colonial city. It was, in fact, a multicultural trending city. And next, we turn our attention to the Fort Zelandia. Since we finished studying the city, the next step was to look at rebuilding the fort. Professor Wang found a very important Old Dutch document. This record gave us the exact measurements for the entire fort in the 1640s, including the upper main fort, lower fort, the base, and the outer fort. Professor Wang turned this old writing into a very clear table. Then he matched this data with the diary of Fort Zelandia, and to sort out the different building stages of the fort. This helped confirm that the fort looked mostly finished by the middle of 1640s. And using those measurements, Professor Huang's team also studied the main defense ideas popular back in the Netherlands at that time. So once you have the rules and the size, you can draw the best possible floor plan for the fort. And step by step, we reconstructed how the fort's 3 layers were organized and connected. Then we took this guest for plan and put it right on top of where the actual archaeological remains were found. When the design rules, the historical records, and the remains all match up, this final matching process gave us the first complete plan of Fort Zelandia. And with combining the resource from both studies, the city and the fortress, we could finally recreate the entire landscape of Zelandia in 1640. And this research has taken nearly a decade, and it represents a major leap forward in understanding Dutch period architecture in Taiwan. But then comes an important question. How can we make these academic findings meaningful to the public? So next, let's look at the public engagement and reinterpretation we have achieved over the past few years. We started with exhibitions, showing cases, the latest discoveries. These were holding places like the NCKU Museum, the Tainan Art Museum, and even local grand hotels. And we even brought the exhibition to Japan. These events not only introduced the research to the public, but also sparked growing interest from local groups, schools, and the media. And because of its attention, the NCKU Museum asked our team to develop a VR experience for Zelandia. Players can put on VR glasses, follow a story-based journey, and explore what life was like 400 years ago. Okay. Sorry. Okay. It's not an easy work because it's not only the details of these buildings, but also many items in research. This old wooden things. And more recently, we have also been involved in the Fort Zelandia AR system for the Tainan city government. Visitors can use their phone and scan QR code around the site to view 3D reconstruction of the fortress. And now we have already working on phase 2, which will extend these AR markers throughout the old city area. It's really exciting because this technology helps the public visualize his story directly in the place and where it happened. And the government is very interested in what phase 3 or phase 4 of this work. And in terms of archaeology, last year the NCKU archaeology team excavated an open area within the old city, and they found many remains from the Dutch, Qing, and Japanese periods. Now this area has since been turned into an outdoor display space. These excavations provide their easily research was correct and gave us real physical proof to share with the public. And now the site acts as an educational space. And through tours, workshops, and events, it helps people reconnect with the very early history of their city. So, after all these years of research, what is next? This year, Professor Huang proposed a new direction. He wants to development Anping into an eco-museum. The idea is to treat the entire historic district as an open museum, not just preserving buildings. An eco-museum focuses on three things: territory, heritage, and community. It's about the local people and their cultural landscape, just like these two examples. Yeah, and they both show how protected historical sites successfully and deep community involvement. And to achieve this, Professor Wang has brought together experts in architecture, urban planning, and historical research. This new project aims to make Anping the model for heritage-based community development and hopefully a leading example for other historical sites in Taiwan. And short conclusion. Yeah. For Zelandia and city was started as a colonial site 400 years ago, but over time it evolved through research, restoration, and public participation to a living heritage that reflects both global history and local identity. And through this effort, the fortress is no longer just a heritage of foreign power, but a shared space that continues to connect people, past and present, in more meaningful ways. And thank you for your kind attention. Yeah.
谢谢思文的介绍哈。那刚刚最后有一个部分应该它上面讲的这个内容哈，我想思文可不可以再回到前一页的地方？对，请你回到前一页的。
Could you go back to your previous slide?
讲一下，刚刚那个后面对，请你再那个。
So could you reiterate a bit? Last slide, because there was music. So here, could you, without music, could you recap again your final message?
Sorry.
对，直接讲哈，对。
So just go ahead.
Give a short conclusion.
那最后的一个简
For
短。
Zelandia and city was started as colonial site 400 years ago, but over time it evolved through research, restoration, and public participation into a living heritage that reflects both global history and local identity. Through these efforts, the fortress is no longer just a heritage of foreign colonial power, but a shared space that continue to connect people, past and present, in more meaningful ways.
Yeah. OK.
Thank you.
谢谢思文的介绍哈，因为好像没有办法听到这个刚刚。
Music in the background, so we weren't able to hear you clearly, but thank you for the conclusion. And later on, during the discussion, we will also get to reflect upon Suwen's content. We might also have a Q&A as well. So in the following, we'd like to invite our third speaker, Dr. Shikha Jain. Dr. Jain is Vice President of ICOMOS ICO Fort. I'm also part of ICO Fort. So ICO Fort is dedicated to the preservation of fortifications and also military heritage. Dr. Jain is a renowned historical architect, practitioner and expert in India. Dr. Jain also runs an organization, DRONAH, so it is very renowned both in India and also globally. She has led many important projects. They have also successfully inscribed the Maratha military landscape on the World Heritage List. So here we're very excited about Dr. Jain's talk. She's going to share with us the Maratha military heritage, the Maratha military landscape of India, especially the role of local communities in the nomination and also management of a serial World Heritage Site. The floor is yours, Dr.
Thank you, ANIH, for inviting me today for this very important conversation on the involvement of community in military heritage. So my presentation is about the Maratha military landscapes of India, which was inscribed in July 2025. And I'm going to speak about the role of the community, both in the nomination process and as it continues to be managed as a serial World Heritage Site. This shows, when it was inscribed on the World Heritage List, our Honorable Prime Minister mentioned that every Indian is elated. And this is really not just a political statement, because compared to other sites that have been inscribed, of course, every site inscribed in any country is a point for celebration. It's a moment of celebration for all the citizens. But in particular, in case of the Maratha military landscapes, there is a very strong associational value which is associated with the Maratha community and the founding leader of the Maratha kingdom. And he is more of a national figure and something that all the Indians learn from. And that is why there was a special mention about every Indian being elated with this. There were, of course, you can see the communities. There were 12 forts that were inscribed as a serial nomination. And the community on their own, the moment they heard about the inscription, it was evening time, but there were several forts like this one in Raigarh where they had celebrations throughout the night by the local communities and the villagers around the fort. I will just briefly introduce the nomination itself before I, start talking about the involvement of people in this particular nomination and its management. There is a vast network of about 390 forts, which was actually as part of the Maratha military landscape network. And all these forts were mapped along the natural terrain and historic trade routes. In fact, the map that you see of peninsular India is, of the west coast and east coast. And it is linked with what was in the earlier presentation, where we had Europeans, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the British who were doing maritime trading. So this was a very important location, and the network of forts is actually spread across these coastal areas, largely on the western coast, which comes under the state of Maharashtra. This particular area was developed as the Maratha territory and titled as Swarajya. And it is along 3 axes that this defense system was created by the Maratha founder, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So you see a complete mapping of this network was done. There were some forts that were already existing, some that were newly created by the Maratha leader, and some that were adapted and expanded in order to create this entire network. And this network was along 3 main axes, as I said. There were hill forts along the mountain that you see, the first inner coastline out here, number 1. Then there were sea forts along the Konkan coast. So you can see all the sea, coastal and island forts along this. And there was a third line of axes which extended across to the Coromandel coast towards the other side, where there was again a network of forts created. So looking at these expansive network, it was finally, there was a complete sifting that was done technically on which were the forts, primary anchors for this entire network, and 12 exceptional forts were selected from this, which is part of the serial nomination that was finally inscribed. So I'll just give you a glimpse of these 12 forts. The criteria that they were inscribed on, one was criteria 4 that covers the attributes of strategic vision, which means how this network expanded and controlled the entire area. So how these primary anchor forts were significant to the network functioning. Secondly, the nuanced understanding of terrain, on how they use the natural terrain, whether it was the sea forts or the hill forts, how the terrain was used for military and defense features. And of course, here you can also see the Dutch survey map. So even despite the fact that in particular forts under the Marathas, the Dutch did not really construct anything, but you will find the Dutch VOC having a large number of surveys, which was so relevant in the previous presentation. So all like Dutch, Portuguese, and British period maps you would find are also including some of these Maratha maps. The Maratha military design innovations, like you see the particular extension, and this was a very important defense feature. This is in the fort of Rajgarh that you see, where you have a double fortification into an extended spur, which was called Machi. So this is a very typical feature of Maratha forts, hill forts, that was identified as one of the strong attributes. And besides the criteria 4 on the architectural features and planning, it was what is really unique about here is the criteria 6. And here the forts are tangible expressions of enduring ideas of self-rule. What I mentioned, Swarajya, that was a term coined by the founder of Maratha kingdom, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. And it indicates the cultural resilience associated with the Marathas as they promoted, the self-rule was promoted. And though this idea of self-rule or Swarajya was forged in a specific historical context during the Maratha period, the ideology of Swarajya profoundly shaped the evolution of Indian political consciousness. It became a guiding principle for anti-colonial movements in the 19th and 20th centuries, including the Indian freedom struggle. So it's these values of resilience, vigilance, and ethical resistance embedded in these sites that have global resonance in a world that continues today to reckon with colonial past and the pursuit of sovereign dignity. These forts are central to intergenerational identity transmission, where communities actively engage to commemorate courage, sacrifice, and leadership models of the Maratha period. Here you see the traditional, martial arts being performed in the fort itself. I'll just give you a brief introduction of the 12 forts. The number 1 is the Salher Fort, which is one of the highest forts. And what is unique in terms of planning is that at times you cannot even make out that there is a fort. It looks just like a hilltop. But the fortifications are merged so very well with the landscape and camouflage. And that is the uniqueness or beauty of these particular hill forts. Second is the Shivneri Fort, which is also the birthplace of the founding Maratha ruler. And that is why you have, celebrations every year here on the birth anniversary of the founding ruler. The third fort is Lohagarh, which has very unique spurs, as you can see out here. The typical Machi or defense feature, which is very unique to the Maratha forts. You have the island fort of Khanderi, which also had a very strategic position in controlling the entire, areas, including it had a control over Mumbai in terms of visual control. Raigarh, which was the second capital of the Marathas, is one of the most extensive fort, which has water bodies and palace spaces and several structures. And it is also the place for coronation of the Maratha ruler, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and the term Chhatrapati that was used was from this coronation onward in 1674, and it continues to be celebrated today. So again, there is an annual celebration of the coronation day. Then the first capital of the Marathas was Rajgarh. I have already shown the extensive spur or machi and defense features. Pratapgarh, which was also a very unique fort, and this is actually a living fort because you can see the houses in this. The settlement continues to live here. There are about 100 houses. And yet the fort wall and fortifications are completely intact. So it's an example of living heritage. This is another view showing the extended spur or the machi defense feature in case of Pratapgarh, which was one of the first Maratha forts designed completely. And again, in this fort, you also see celebrations, specifically during particular festivals of Navratra, when the entire fort is lit up, and you can see it from the ground level also. The island forts like Swarndurg, which are completely, islands in themselves. Panhala, which is another hill fort, and here you have a particular celebration where during the war, one of the attacks on Panhala Fort, there was a 50-kilometer escape route for the Maratha founding ruler. And in order to celebrate that, you see people annually actually take that particular trek. So this is, saying from Panhala to Pavankhand, which was the route taken as an escape route by the Marathas, by the Maratha forces when they were being attacked in this particular fort. And this is celebrated by the community through special tracks, and they walk these 50 kilometers as a commemoration to that particular event. Vijayadurg, which is a coastal fort, also is very unique and has a lot of defense features which are distinctive in themselves. The Sindhudurg, which is an island fort which has very extensive fortifications, one of the largest area in terms of island fort on the Konkan coast. And lastly, the Jinji Fort, which is towards the Coromandel coast on the eastern side of the Indian peninsula. And you can see how these three hills were integrated into a single fortification strategy. So if we look at the stakeholders involved in the fort's nomination, it was, of course, Government of India, as Archaeological Survey of India has protection over 8 of these forts. The Government of Maharashtra, where the State Department of Maharashtra Archaeology, they have protection over 4 of these forts. And then, of course, you have the royal family descendants from the Maratha, from the Chhatrapatis, which are in 3 distinct locations, including near Thanjavur or near Jinji, which is on the eastern peninsular side of India. But mostly it is the people of Maharashtra, even the local experts who were from Maharashtra, the historians who had complete knowledge, the archaeologists who worked on excavating these forts, the villagers around each fort. So there were villages specifically which even today take care of these forts, and the villagers are very involved. The trekkers, it is actually a very popular, way in which they celebrate forts. You have trekkers across Maharashtra, several organizations which go every weekend, they are trekking and exploring these forts. And there are more than 100 fort NGOs within Maharashtra who just get involved in, either cleaning the forts or maintaining the forts, and of course the Maratha community across India and the world who celebrate these forts. So what I'm trying to say is that though we look at forts, of course, across the world, but and even in India, we have been looking at studying forts in several cases. But this kind of community association that you see in Maharashtra, and particularly because of the associational value with the Maratha founding ruler Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, is not visible anywhere else, where you almost see that the forts are revered like the temples or a religious structure. And this probably is the energy that helped in the whole process of nomination and management, and hopefully would continue to help in managing these forts. This activity was initiated in 2016 by Chhatrapati Sambhaji Raje, one of the descendants of the founder of Maratha Kingdom, with the government of Maharashtra. And this is one of the first pictures showing how it started. You have the director of Directorate of Archaeology, Maharashtra, and there was a book that was particularly came up on the forts of Maharashtra with the efforts of the National Scientific Committee of Fortifications of ICOMOS India. And in 2017-18, there were several discussions. This is on the Raigarh Fort amongst various local experts as well as national experts on how one can move forward with this kind of nomination because of the extensive structures, which forts to be taken up. And finally, by 2020 is when some of the forts were selected and placed on the tentative list of India. Then, of course, 21 to 25, the dossier preparation and nomination process with community participation was started. And the community served in several ways as enablers for the nomination, as guides and storytellers, because most of these forts are located at places where it's difficult to reach. It's not like a typical tourist site where you have all the amenities there. So they facilitated the fort visits with food and wayfinding. The selection of forts was done, engaging local historians who had extensive research in the local language, which had to be interpreted because these forts were not documented before. Supporting nomination activities in model making and other aspects like cleaning and maintenance of the forts was also undertaken by the community. This is a picture showing how the links between the forts or fort networks, which were actually part of the trading routes. And this is a current picture where you see that these routes are still being used by the community to carry certain goods or use it for travel. This is a photograph to show how the team that was involved in preparing the nomination dossier was largely involving local architects from the colleges in Maharashtra. So most of these were also, involved, also already involved in trekking the forts, because as children, the people in Maharashtra, start learning as children, about the forts, and they do these weekend trekkings. But of course, once they have these architectural degree, they get into mapping and documenting. So the team largely for the nomination dossier was selected, involving the local architects. There was, even during the fort visits, there were excavations or surface archaeology that was undertaken by the Deccan College of Architecture students and interns. And like I said, when we are looking at the food, so while exploring these forts, I mean, we visited more than 30 forts for the final selection of those 12 forts. And everywhere it was a 1 or 2 day trekking. There were no facilities available. And it is at that time you would find, like, we would ask local villagers to just organize some food. So you can see, how in their house they would just organize a food, and after a trek, what would be served as the local food. This is another example where you see some of the local vendors, and on how they are organizing foods for the visitors, which is for the hill forts that are high up and require a lot of trekking. And in some cases like Pratapgarh Fort, where you have a living settlement, how the locals are involved in this particular facility. There are also challenges while climbing the forts. And of course, as it was done traditionally, you can see, 4 people carrying an old lady. And in cases where we still have accessibility problems, it's the local community and the villagers that come forward to support in this manner for accessibility. In terms of maintenance and cleanings, as I mentioned, there are about 100 fort NGOs within Maharashtra. The number of forts are many. It's not only these 12 which are inscribed on the World Heritage List. There are additional 50 forts in the buffer zone, and of course the 300 plus that I mentioned. So there is a rigorous activity by the forts NGOs in maintaining these on a voluntary basis. And even for archaeological findings, you can see this archaeologically excavated site of Raigarh by the Archaeological Survey of India. But there are Deccan College interns, who are conversant with archaeology or who are studying archaeology, who are regularly involved in the excavation process, both by the Archaeological Survey of India and the State Department of Archaeology of Maharashtra. There was a management framework that was devised for this serial nomination, where we had a Fort Apex Advisory Committee chaired by the Chief Secretary and also supported by the Secretary Culture as the member secretary, including other departments such as forest, tourism. There were 12 forts, so all 12 district collectors were involved, and NGOs and relevant historians. Then there was another committee at the district level, which also had a local voice. So there was a local level committee where people were asked about the decisions being taken. And this is a participatory management approach that was followed in the entire framework for management. While preparing, for the nomination and during the evaluation, there were specific instructions given by the Department of Archaeology Maharashtra to various district collectors, and there was a specific focus on outreach events to be organized. One, of course, to generate the voluntary support that they were giving for maintenance of the forts, but also to make them aware of what is the outstanding universal value in their particular fort. So this is an example of an action plan for one particular fort where, there is a specific focus on conducting awareness programs and capacity buildings to involve locals in the maintenance of the fort, also as guide training and for rescue operations. So even because these forts are very high, as I mentioned, the hill forts, and accessibility is a concern. So even if there is a situation where a rescue is required, then it is the local villagers who are most familiar on accessing the site uphill, and they were specifically involved in disaster management plan for the management framework. The nomination has a tri-level conservation policy that looks at the ICOMOS guidelines on fortifications and military heritage that were drafted by ICOFORT, the national conservation policy, and also the regional treaties that was written by the Marathas, the Ajnapatra, which actually mentions how the forts need to be managed and how they need to be conserved using lime and traditional material. So it was a combination of these three that was used to finally identify the attributes and also the policies for conservation and maintenance. And there were conservation guidelines that were created as a manual. This was translated into the local Marathi language, and it was distributed to all the local people as well as local contractors and architects who were working on these forts by the government of Maharashtra. So this shows, the typical features that you have in the Maratha hill fort design or the Maratha sea fort design. So it was to make them familiar with, particular features that are typical of Maratha design, and also add to the attributes or the value for which it is recognized on the World Heritage List. this was further carried on. There were several dialogues that took place during the 46th World Heritage Committee in Delhi. There was a side session that was hosted by ICOFORT, where fortifications and military landscapes of Asia were discussed to look at, the comparative concerns in this particular case. And specific outreach activities of forts were initiated by the Directorate of Archaeology, Maharashtra, and Government of Maharashtra and Government of India also, which were in three particular directions: the fort awareness or Durg Jagriti, the fort practicing, or how do you study the technical aspect, which was the Durg Abhyas, and the fort celebrations or festivals, which was the Durg Utsav. So looking at these three aspects on how the community can be involved through various events and activities in all these three directions, there were outreach activities that were planned, including village level local workshops for settlements in the buffer area of these forts. Architectural schools and primary and secondary schools were engaged in the entire activity. For conservation, archaeology, engineering, tourism, and history disciplines in colleges and institutes, several experts, interns, and faculty was engaged for this purpose. And of course, there were other associated universities or experts on environment and agriculture, because these are large buffer areas that require to be also inspected in terms of environment and landscape concerns. These are some of the views that show how particular activities were carried out, the outreach, the way the community was in this particular place. You see how they are addressing the community activities and explaining the outstanding universal value. The awards that were specifically, the competitions that were created and awards that were given to communities. This is a signature campaign on the right, where you see the community signing on their support for the forts. Painting competitions that were held at various forts. Maharashtra, the marathon, there were several marathons that were run during this time, and you can see how people are very keen to support this entire process through these particular activities. These are some of the views showing how particular activities and records of the community members who were involved were carried out. The community members were also involved in the celebrations. You can see here the traditional Maratha dress on how they welcome anyone for the entrance of the fort. The traditional martial arts that I have already mentioned being celebrated on the forts on a regular basis. This is the interaction that the ICOMOS expert who visited the fort had with local communities, and in each fort he was able to talk to the community and understand how they are involved. This is one example where you see a little girl who's 5 years old, and she's mentioning how many forts she has climbed and how strongly she feels about the forts in Maharashtra because of the association with the founding ruler Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So this is something that is ingrained in most of the people in Maharashtra right as a child, because they get taught martial arts in schools, the traditional martial arts. You can see, children performing here in the fort of Panhala. And the fort building is actually a tradition. There is an annual festival of Diwali, which is celebrated all across India. But what is unique in Maharashtra is that all the children get involved in fort building. So, they can create models of their forts, and there are awards at the local level, also by the government, by the NGOs on who has made the best fort and how to encourage them. So you can see that this is actually a celebration in the entire Maharashtra during Diwali. And also, once this was recognized and inscribed, the government of Maharashtra made special efforts of involving the local community more And you can see a statement by the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums Maharashtra saying the next phase post inscription will focus on improving conservation, creating tourism amenities, developing site management plans, and launching public education programs. And a major part of this plan is to train and certify local residents as guides. And this initiative aims to involve people living near the forts in tourism and heritage promotion, providing them with employment opportunities while also enhancing the visitor experience through locally rooted knowledge. The local community have a lot of stories to tell, which others may not know, and it is very important to involve them as guides. So this is, in currently, like you see, this is in 2025, 10th October 2025, you see how a particular Diwali celebration again is more boosted now because of this particular inscription. So they have all these 12 forts in this particular Diwali which are being created. This is, an associated area where a grand exhibition was held from 20th to 26th October, Dombivali, as by an NGO, Janta Raj Yuva Pratishthan. And it features the 12 forts and the celebration using military landscapes, replicas, models, and interactive displays. This is another event, again, organized, by the Department of Archaeology, Maharashtra, but looking at archaeology, technically what is required, involving, archaeologists. So here the Deccan College of Archaeology is involved in looking at what kind of excavations are now needed in the second phase of after their inscription, because these are huge forts and several levels of excavations are still being carried out. Also, like looking at how students are involved right from their childhood, and some of them when they become professionals till later. This is diary of one of the school students, Tanel Alwani, who actually worked on the nomination dossier extensively with us. And so you can see how as a child he was still pasting these pictures and looking at climbing forts, learning more about them. He finally graduated as an architect, and as an intern again he worked with us on forts and details. And now after the inscription, he worked on the entire nomination dossier, and after the inscription he's gone back to Maharashtra and he's actually teaching on making the children more aware about what is unique about these forts, why did they get inscribed. So you can see here he's addressing a local school there, also colleges of architecture, and this is the one where he's actually in his own college, Brick School of Architecture, which in fact is headed by Dr. Vedahi Lavant, who's also today with us. And he continues to spread this awareness. So this is just one person I'm giving an example, but each child in Maharashtra often carries this value. You can see how these particular activities continue. So he's taking them along with a local NGO to various fort sites, making them aware of what is unique in each fort. And these activities continue today in, they have in fact extrapolated. They were always there before the nomination process. They became more during the nomination, and post-inscription, it's really proliferated. More and more Maharashtrians and the community, local community, is getting involved in the forts. And now, of course, they recognize the value itself, the outstanding universal value, the attributes, the techniques, how they were made, and their role and responsibility in how they need to protect it for future. So thank you. This is my last slide.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jen. Your speech are very well. It's very interesting and full of information about this military landscape. And I think we will have some question and some discussion after that. So now we will move on to our the fourth speakers. 我们第四位讲者啊，是来自于我们第四位从菲律宾来的第四位讲 这位讲者呢，
Professor Victor Torres, our first speaker, Professor Victor Torres from De La Salle University. And he is a professor in the Department of History. So Filipino history, historical preservation, and also education. These are his key expertise. And he's going to share with us the works, the preservation works, and also restoration works conducted at Intramuros, the walled district of Manila. Professor Torres has also a lot of writings in this area. So we really look forward to Professor Torres's talk.
Good afternoon.
So
everyone.
floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. The title, and first I'd like to thank the NAIH for inviting me to lecture. My lecture is in 5 parts. It covers, of course, the restoration, the preservation, and the challenges of the walled district of Intramuros, Manila. The title is to preserve and enhance, which is part of the law that created the office that conducts the restoration still today, of the walled city of Intramuros. So the first part is a general history on historical preservation in the Philippines. Government policies on the preservation of a country's cultural heritage became an important aspect of governance in every administration. Our present ideas in the preservation of our cultural heritage is not new. It began with the creation of libraries and archives, then moved on to monuments and eventually structures like buildings and houses. The concern, as we all know, is related to the value we give to our historical past and our cultural identity. In the Philippines, the state's part in heritage preservation is done by legislation. The primary importance of legislative support is to ensure government measures into providing adequate short and long-term measures to guarantee the preservation of national and local historic sites and structures. The Philippine efforts of legislation on heritage preservation began during the early years of the American colonial period in the Philippines, when the laws were enacted by the Philippine Commission in 1901, like Act number 293, which allocated government funds for the erection of the present Rizal Monument, which is still existing today, in 1903. Additional laws were also enacted by the Philippine Assembly in 1907, the Philippine Legislature in 1916, then the Commonwealth Government in 1935, the latter issuing Commonwealth Act 171 in 1936 to preserve Filipino-Hispanic designs on buildings in Intramuros, legislation for identifying and the placing of markers for individual personages, structures, and historical places resulted in the creation of the Historical Markers and Research Committee in 1937, which placed the duty of identifying historical and cultural sites under one institution. World War II and the post-war modernization brought about a larger resurgence of calls for heritage preservation following the destruction of old buildings and the disappearance of historic spaces. There were efforts done by the post-war government with private groups to restore and preserve historical sites like Intramuros, but these efforts were only sustainable if there are available funds. This is where our discussion preserving Intramuros, the walled city of Manila, comes in. What was probably the biggest blow to Intramuros was Republic Act 1607, which declared the walled city as a commercial, residential, and education district. It led to the building of modern structures and the widening of the centuries-old streets. Ironically, this was the same law that also mentioned the restoration of the walls and fortifications. It was during the term of President Ferdinand Marcos that cultural heritage became a government priority. There were at least 40 laws passed between 1965 until 1986, many of which were made for the erection or preservation of national shrines and the identification as well as the conservation, restoration, preservation, and the maintenance of cultural property. There were two significant laws that were passed during the Marcos first term. One was Republic Act 4368 that created the National Historical Commission that later was renamed the National Historical Institute in 1972, and much later, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or the NHCP, in 2010. The other law was Republic Act 4846, or the Cultural Properties and Preservation Act, dated June 18, 1966, and its amendments in Presidential Decree 374, enacted in 1974. The martial law era from 1972 to 1983 and the continuing dictatorship under Ferdinand Marcos until 1986 proved to be disadvantageous for cultural heritage advocates. The period saw a large volume of presidential decrees on the preservation of monuments and sites all over the Philippines. Because of the declaration of martial law and the subsequent abolishment of Congress, the legislation of laws was virtually non-existent. Abolishing the legislature had successfully protracted debate and lobbying general attendant to legislative process. In short, it meant delays. Only the signature now of the president was needed to amend the law, to enact the law. So when the cultural agenda of the Marcos administration became a priority. But the fast legislation has its faults. No? You only need the signature of a president. Considering the haste in which the laws were made, many of the provisions left much to be desired. Thus, soon after the enactment of the law, some would immediately need amendments because one type of deficiency or omission which escaped the attention of those who helped prepare the laws. In short, it was like passing through a conveyor belt of decrees that eventually had to be revised from time to time. Why the large concern on culture by the Marcos administration? One, the genuine interest of First Lady Imelda Marcos, since a cultural program, was part of her mission to be recognized as a patroness of culture and the arts. Her mission was further bolstered when she was made governor of Metro Manila and the head of what was known as the Ministry of Human Settlements, which made a large part of the metropolis that contained a large number of historical and cultural sites under her control. Tourism was also part of the interest for the promotion of the country through its historical and cultural sites that were part of the country's development visualized by President Marcos in his National Development Plan. Historical tourism was the first time this was mentioned during the Marcos administration. It could be easily said that the policies on culture created by the Marcoses were part of their martial law propaganda. Part of this may be true, but part of it was also genuine, as heritage preservation was also lobbied by certain sectors and individuals, like the National Historical Institute and the National Museum, whose concern for the preservation and the conservation of artifacts and sites are genuine. With the Marcoses lending an ear to them, it was easy enough to acquire an enabling law for the sake of cultural heritage. One of the laws was for the creation and preservation of what later became or recognized as a National Heritage Site, which was Intramuros. The walled city of Intramuros was the capital city of the Philippines during the Spanish regime. It meant that when you said Intramuros, it meant Manila. This 64-hectare area was beside the Pasig River, was also the center of the Spanish Empire in Asia. You can see here a picture, of course, of the old Intramuros. The walls were designed similar to a military fort that surrounded and protected the city, complete with 16 fortifications consisting of bastions, ravelins, and redoubts on every corner of its pentagonal shape, as well as midway in between entrances that provided access to the city. The walls measured some 4.5 kilometers or 2.81 miles long, with varying heights of 4.5 to 6 meters and a thickness of 2 to 2.5 meters. It took the Spaniards 250 years, from 1590 to 1830, to complete the constructions, repairs, renovation of the walls and fortifications. Intramuros had 7 gates, which provided entrance to the city, of which 2 were later demolished during the American colonial period. The city itself had 32 streets designed in a checkerboard pattern called a quadricula, which still exists until today. Here is a picture of old Intramuros. You can see there the checkerboard pattern of the streets. Each street led to an entrance, or each street led to a fortification. So you can see here the concept of the military design that they had to defend the city. Being the capital of the Philippines, Intramuros was the center of the political, economic, religious, educational, and socio-cultural life of the Spanish colony. It was also the center of military life. All the major government offices, military and medical establishments, schools, and headquarters of the religious orders were located here. What could be considered as a major change in Intramuros was its transformation from the capital of an empire to only a city district under the Americans, when American colonial officials extended the boundaries of Manila beyond the walls in 1901. The Americans considered Intramuros medieval because it practically stopped serving as its military function in the late 19th century. The Americans considered Intramuros medieval, in that character, and began demolishing the walls, only to be stopped by concerned Americans who recognized the structure as part of the country's heritage. The modernization of Manila happened beyond the walls. Government offices, hospitals, schools were moved out to bigger areas outside the walls in buildings made out of concrete. These big areas were later laid out into residential areas, as you will see later. Intramuros was literally forgotten and dismissed as an old enclave that only came alive during religious festivities and school occasions. The city retained its old features as it modernized until the beginning of the Second World War and the Japanese occupation. So you can see the red circle, Intramuros. Okay? You can see how the city grew around around old Intramuros. Most of these were actually the concept of the Americans. Okay, to give you an idea of what these were before, most of them were actually rice fields surrounding the city. World War II destroyed Intramuros when it became the center of the Battle of Manila in 1945. At war's end, 80% of Manila was destroyed. A large part of it was Intramuros. It would remain a dead city until restoration efforts began in the 1950s. The efforts to restore Intramuros began with the signing of Republic Act 597 in March 1951 that declared Fort Santiago a national shrine and called for the restoration of the Intramuros walls. Unfortunately, in spite of these laws, there was no money. Everything had to rely on government funding. Other decrees were enacted by subsequent administrations, but this did not make much headway. It was only in 1966, during the first term of President Marcos, that real efforts were made with the forming of the Intramuros Restoration Committee. Under Executive Order 16 year 1966. Under what was called the IRC, several Intramuros gates and parts of the walls were restored using government funds and private donations. The IRC was abolished in 1972 with the reorganization of the national government under martial law. Its functions, as well as the other historical committees formed in the 60s, were transferred under the National Historical Institute. The National Historical Institute at that time was under the Department of Education and Culture. Presidential Decree 1277 was issued in January 1978. This was the first heritage law issued by President Marcos under his sole power as lawmaker. It provided a definite set of rules for the walled city restoration. This was followed by Presidential Decree 1537, okay, a result that tried to solve much of the conflicting provisions in the earlier restoration laws. The budget for the restoration was placed under the Ministry of Human Settlements, so it fell under First Lady Imelda Marcos. Intramuros administration, the office that is still existing until today, was made because of this. A building construction in 1978 that brought about the creation of the first and probably only national government agency concentrated on the restoration of a national heritage site. A government official, Dr. Jaime Laya, who was then Central Bank Deputy Governor and Budget Minister, was on his way to a meeting when he saw the structure that you see in the picture now. It was towering over the Manila Cathedral and over the Intramuros walls. It was a 12-story building originally. The building was on the site of the original Spanish governor's palace, which was destroyed in an earthquake in the 19th century and remained in ruins. It was turned over to the government during the American occupation of the Philippines, and it was only after the war that something was made out of the vacant lot. As you can see, a 12-story building was going to be planned to be erected there. The structure was clearly going to soar past the bell tower of the Manila Cathedral, completely overshadowing the church and obstructing the view of the remaining Intramuros walls. Dr. Laya immediately reported the matter to Marcos, who ordered the construction of the building stopped. But after a meeting with bank officials, he allowed the construction to continue, but until only the 8th floor. So the 12th floor plan was scrapped. At the same time, he ordered Laya to draft a decree that would guide the future of the rebuilding of the walled city. Dr. Laya worked out the provisions of the proposed decree with several cultural advocates and who were initially part of the Intramuros Restoration Committee. They became the authors of Presidential Decree 1616 that President Marcos signed into law on April 10, 1979. It was a unique law, for it served as a model for urban planning of special historical cultural zones. Until today, it is still being used for the pattern of several historic cities in the Philippines. Presidential Decree 1616 created the Intramuros Administration, an agency dedicated solely to the preservation, conservation, and the maintenance of the walled city. The creation of IA, as it's known today, began the full-scale restoration of the walled city under the auspices of the national government. The implementing rules and regulation that was adopted and promulgated in 1981 standardized building heights, construction materials, designs, and types of establishments that are to be placed in Intramuros. The budget for restoration was taken from the national budget, the first time such a move was made by the government for cultural heritage. It had its own board of administrators from different government agencies which had a stake in the development of Intramuros. The Intramuros mandate included the responsibility for the orderly restoration and development of Intramuros as a monument to the historic Hispanic period in history. It ensured the planned development and management of promotion of Intramuros as a national heritage site. It contributed to the cultural and spiritual enrichment of Filipinos and the socio-economic progress of the Intramuros community. It integrated historic preservation with urban renewal and cultural tourism stated in the decree that IA is mandated to follow. Restoration of the walls and fortifications involved research in local and foreign archives, especially in Spain, for the plans of the walls and fortifications as well as the buildings and residences that existed in Intramuros. The material used for the walls, particularly the stone materials, were taken from quarries in the provinces. Construction was closely monitored by architects and heritage advocates for a close, authentic look, what was to be done as much as possible for Intramuros. Now came the next problem in the restoration of the walled city. The question that cropped up as restoration was still going on was, what next? What will be done with the walls and fortifications once it was restored? At first, the answer came in the form of a cultural development program that initially formed by IA using the walls and fortifications as venues for cultural performances. This included the concert series that you can see in the slide. They call it Puertorial Evenings, which featured local and international artists. A cultural center called the Plaza San Luis Complex housed the Casa Manila Museum, a house museum that featured 19th century lifestyles through antique furniture and other household items. The restored fortifications became parks and event venues for visitors to the walled city. But one of the challenges that presented itself to the Intramuros administration happened in 1986, when the agency was placed under the Department of Tourism. Aside from the restoration and the maintenance of the walls and fortifications, a tourism plan now had to be formulated to incorporate the original cultural development with a strategy to sell Intramuros as a prime urban destination. The Tourism Master Plan of 1986 involved classifying Intramuros not just as a heritage site, but as a heritage, tourism, and cultural zone. Challenges. The management of Intramuros posed several challenges with regards to heritage management, but also to political jurisdiction. First and foremost, Intramuros has a living community. There are schools, there are residences, there are offices, there's of course convents for the churches. Okay, it is a place that is overseen by the city of Manila as a district of the city government. Thus, local government laws should apply to it. It was assumed that Intramuros was a quote-unquote private domain of the national government and that the city of Manila has no jurisdiction over it. This is a mistaken assumption. The city government still has legal jurisdiction over Intramuros. But because Intramuros is covered by a special law that is recognized by the local government code, any regulation passed by the city government concerning Intramuros has to pass to IA, especially building heights. This is being done until today, although there are periods of friction between the city government and IA, especially on the matter of projects involving funds. There was always a time when a Manila legislator would present a bill for the abolishment of IA and passing its function to the city government. Okay. Today, we have another case that occurred because now the city government wants to take over the golf course, which is technically under the Department of Tourism, now, and also under the management of IA because it used to be the moat of the moat area of the walled city. Second, management of a heritage zone involves special laws for the zone. One such rule is the emphasis that structures, especially office and government buildings, school buildings, that are to be constructed should follow a Filipino-Hispanic design that has to be approved by the Intramuros administration. This includes a height limit of 3 stories for buildings outside and inside Intramuros. Modern structures that existed before IA was created and before PD 1616 was enforced have to change their facade design at a certain time period. Okay. This rule has consistently put many private buildings owners at loggerheads with IA and still continues to be so until today. Intramuros today, as an assessment, this would be my last slide. Heritage preservation during the pre and post-World War II period was an activity that had the least priority for the administrations of that period. It was during the Marcos administration that the concern became an actual government activity with the enactment of laws concerning culture and the creation of the Intramuros administration. It was a pioneering law, for it imposed a specific site with rules and regulations not only for its preservation but also for its urban development in a continuously modernizing city. But did the idea of an agency like IA work? Fortunately, it did. IA became the framework for other heritage sites like Silay in Negros, Iloilo, and of course Vigan in Ilocos Sur. These areas became the examples of heritage preservation today and eventually catered to many of the tourism programs of the provinces and other regions in the Philippines. What is not lost in Intramuros is its continuous growth in tourism. Until today, it has a very large percentage of tourism visitors in Manila, especially that involves heritage. Intramuros has transformed through the centuries from a capital city to an urban tourist attraction and a district teeming with life from its offices, establishments, and schools. It is a national heritage site where the government's efforts for its restoration became a showcase for the cultural heritage program of the Philippines. But visiting Intramuros today not only means looking at its attractions, it is also there not only to appreciate antiquity, but also to understand and learn from its colorful past. Thank you very much, and I'm ready to answer any questions in our discussion.
Thank you, Professor Jose Torres. It's very crucial situation in your case. I think we will have a discussion after our commenter. 我们接下来呢将会邀请这来进行我们的评论跟一些回馈哈。那
Lavand to share her valuable insights. Dr. Lavand is a member of the ICOMOS ISCCL, and she's also a professor who is involved in the recordation documentation research as well as really in-depth discussion of heritage-related issues. Dr. Lavand is also a revered professor by her students. Dr. Lavand will offer her insights after hearing the 4 presentations today regarding the restoration, preservation, and challenges of cultural heritage. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I can't hear you. Right here, I can hear you. So we can't hear you. Right here. So we can you hear me? Right here.
Am I audible now?
Yes, now we have your voice. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all the experts for wonderful presentations. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Asian Network of Industrial Heritage and Professor Chun Si Won for creating such a meaningful platform and having this wonderful conversation and calling me here as well. All these presentations are like reflections on diverse heritage contexts across Asia. This session has been an enriching dialogue on how memory, identity, and place interconnect within our shared cultural landscapes. Today's four presentations, through distinct in focus and geography, together weave a compelling narrative on how heritage practice is evolving in response to complex historical, social, and emotional realities. In 1972, World Heritage Convention, as a significant guidance resource, elaborates on the way people interact with nature and the fundamental need to preserve and balance between the two. So in Asia, we do experience these like varied kind of experiences through history, heritage around us. We live with it, and that's the beauty of our towns and neighborhood, I think. First presentation by Go Iru that speaks about heritage and conflict as well. That's a sweet memory of war, offered a deeply human perspective on how ordinary objects can embody extraordinary memories. It was a sweet journey through the past and the wonderful heritage you spoke about. A work in Kinmen that transforms the simplicity of piece of candy into a vessel of wartime remembrance and community resilience. It reminds us that heritage interpretation can heal by transforming pain and scarcity into empathy and dialogue within museum spaces. She also spoke about shared memories, collective identities, and that's a living heritage that was an important part of Asian case studies across what we have seen today. Then the second presentation by Chun Soo Woon guided us through the layered history of Fort Zelandia, illuminating how a colonial fortress can be recontextualized through research, archaeology, and local participation. A study shows that the act of reinterpretation, moving from a symbol of occupation to one of the cultural meaning, reveals the living adaptive nature of heritage itself. And similar cases like Shikha ma'am also mentioned about maritime trade routes and connection between these coastal cities, that also could be seen in India. So similar cases we see here as well. And we can surely relate this with the land forts that we have in Indian cases as good examples of military heritage in Indian cases. Dr. Shikha Jain ma'am, as usual, a wonderful presentation and very insightful. Her talk on the Maratha military landscapes of India expanded the scale of discussion to encompass an entire cultural landscape. I can't stop myself from expressing here that Dr. Shikha Jain has not only been an incredible resource in the field of heritage conservation, but also a true mentor and inspiration to many of us. Her dedication and vision have shaped the way we look at cultural landscapes today. Coming from Deccan region myself, I belong to the same region where all these forts are around me. This is a beautiful presentation as a part of Maratha military landscapes of India. Her work feels very close to my heart because of that as well. I have watched and learned from her journey with deep admiration. Her emphasis on community involvement in nomination and management underscores how the spirit of King Shivaji's self-rule and cultural resilience embedded in the Maratha tradition continues to resonate today as well. Her work is a strong testament to the fact that heritage conservation succeeds only when local people remains its central custodians. So it was a huge area that has been nominated under World Heritage and brought that on a world map. So that's a huge achievement, and many generations are going to say thanks to Shikha ma'am for this tremendous work. And one of my student, our college students, Tanay Lalwani, he got a mentorship and he could work in this process of nomination as well. So we are fortunate to get connected with her on this as well. Then Professor Joe Victor Z. Torres, through his reflections on Intramuros, brought our attention to the challenges of managing heritage within living urban environments. His insights into restoration policies, governance, and tourism pressures highlight the importance of maintaining authenticity and cultural integrity in the face of modern development. He also spoke about the political processes and how the laws are being changed and changing, and even the today's context, what are challenges are there in terms of like footfall, the carrying capacity, and what could be the future of history and heritage in today's urbanization processes. So after this, there are few common threads which I would like to highlight here. One was heritage as a medium for dialogue and reconciliation. So each speaker emphasized how sites once marked by conflict, colonization, or hardship can become catalyst for peace and mutual understanding. Second was transforming military and colonial legacies into cultural narratives. These projects demonstrate that interpretation can replace domination with dignity and silence with shared memory, which is more important for us. Third is communities as anchors of continuity. Whether through festivals, interpretation, or conservation initiatives, people remain the heart of heritage meaning, and that makes sense and relevance of heritage and history in today's context. Then fourth is integrated approaches to heritage management. The conversations today reveal the growing need for interdisciplinary participatory frameworks that bridge scholarship, practice, and policy. At the end, way forward and few of the questions to raise at the end. As we reflect on these rich discussions, it becomes evident that heritage is not just about preserving the past or monument, but about shaping futures grounded in empathy and respect. We are challenged to ask ourselves, how can conservation serve as an instrument of peace and dialogue in divided or post-conflict societies? In what ways can we ensure that interpretation of heritage remains inclusive and community-led rather than institutionally imposed? Lastly, what is the future of our history and heritage? How might our heritage practices evolve to remain resilient and relevant? The recent symposium at Lumbini that was arranged by Homos, I must speak about it few lines, was a truly thought-provoking event where stalwarts across the globe shared their insights on collective memory, cultural associations, shared histories, heritage, and the notion of global peace. It's a Buddha's birthplace. So that was a relevant topic where they spoke about conflict and peace and the way we should look at history and heritage. It also reinforced the idea that the heritage around us can act as a catalyst for dialogue on shared resources, sustainability, and the urgent challenges of climate change. Ultimately, the stories shared today remind us that heritage lives not only in monuments, but in people, memories, and the ethics of care we practice as professionals, researchers, experts. I, along with Dr. Shikhajan ma'am, would surely like to invite you to India to experience these wonderful landscapes that has been recently nominated in Sahyadri ranges, 11 forts and 12th one in south part of India. And thank you very much for these presentations.
Thank you, Faidahi, your comment and some conclusion of our 4 speakers, and give us some more some important insight from this presentation, especially from the just past symposium in Lumbini. Share the history and the heritage is common issues in our 4 presentation, and maybe I have some question to each speakers, and now I have first a question to怡如哈，怡如，我想要请问的是说哈，其实好吃堂的这个经验是蛮有趣的一件事情。那作为曾经的战地哈，金门作为战地，那在策展的过程和后来的观众回馈当中，在地民众对于战
What is the local community's response? Was there any negative feedback when you interviewed the community members? We understand that it is difficult memory. It could be even considered as a dark history by some residents. Did you encounter that sort of feedback, meaning that probably didn't want to recall or did not want to participate? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang, for your question. Dr. Wang, that's a great question. As I mentioned in my presentation today, the candy as a catalyst, the candy itself tastes sweet. However, some of the people that we interviewed said that it reminded him of his friend who died when picking up a shell casing because it exploded in his friend's hands. It is true that for some, they have a different approach and different perspective. They view it as part of everyday life. This is what we considered. When they recalled such a wartime memory, in addition to extremely traumatic events, we rarely encounter interviewees who thought negatively about participating in our interview. They did not really express much discomfort. It's really because they grew up in that environment. It was not a taboo to talk about that experience for them. So that's our initial observation. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Guo, for sharing your insights with all of us. You talked about how your exhibition engages the local community, and we appreciate your insights. And the next question goes to Ms. Chen, Si-Wen Chen. You talked about turning the entire area around Fort Zelandia into an eco-museum. So for today's contemporary society, how feasible is that? What's the local community's response toward that idea? Because it was a very distant past. What are your tips for communicating with the community? You talked extensively about the results of your archaeological dig and researches. Setting that aside, let's talk about community engagement. What is the next step for you in order to encourage people's positive feedback and participation? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang, for your question. Indeed, it is a topic that we have been contemplating about. Indeed, the Dutch colonial period dates back to 400 years ago. After the Dutch colonizers withdrew from Taiwan, other colonizers descended upon the island and embarked on other periods of development. Our project revolves around the National Historic Site, which is the Fort Zelandia itself. Over the past 1 to 2 years, we have discovered that there are other nuances, other living memories that are embedded in people's households, everyday life, especially in the elders or the seniors communities. Sometimes the seniors will talk about, oh, when I was young, my grandma used to tell me that this wall used to have this historic significance. And other senior member would be telling us that behind this closed door at the fortress, there is an underground vault or like a dungeon. And my parents told me never go in there. So this sort of stories or anecdotes are not immediately available. You need to continue talking to the older residents around the community in order to enrich the historical and cultural context of the Fort Zelandia. It is indeed a colonial relic. However, there is more beyond that. The recent celebration of the 400th anniversary of the fort is named as Happy 400th Anniversary to Fort Zelandia. Some people did not like that slogan because they didn't view colonial rule as a positive thing. So we still need to continue this dialogue. There's so much that still can be done. There's so much unrealized potential. So we need to continue this conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chen. The story is not finished yet. The story of Fort Zelandia is still being written to this day as more archaeological evidence was unearthed. Now,
I saw the picture of a Maratha military landscape. I totally inspired and totally touched with the beautiful land. So but in the conservation, it may include the tangible part and the intangible part. So as in your presentation, the whole fort system was integrated into a landscape. So what is the difficult of the preservation and the conservation in the landscape scale point of view? And about the intangible part, you choose the criterion 6 as your OUV. So what's the value of the criterion 6 can be integrated into the daily life of the local people? Can you explore more about the criterion 6 and the preservation in the landscape scale and the people's daily life?
Thank you, Dr. Wang. So yeah, that is an interesting question because even during the nomination, there are we have to look at several perspectives. You have, of course, the global perspective and outstanding universal value for the criteria, and of course the ICOMOS evaluation. At the same time, there is a national value and local value. So we know when we are going in for a nomination, it is really the global value that is respected or it's identified. So in fact, this was an observation of ICOMOS, and they felt that the associational value with this particular nomination is because of the founding Maratha ruler, and the locals revere the forts and they take care of the forts, but that maybe, criteria 6 may not really qualify. So this is always a challenge, I think, with criteria 6, because when we talk to the locals and also to the, it could even be at the national level, then one understands that there is a value. But then how do you understand it at a global level and whether it can be recognized or not? So that is a challenge we definitely faced with this nomination. And if you recall in my explanation, I had mentioned that this whole concept or notion of self-rule, that you should start ruling your own. And it came through the Maratha rule as an anti-colonial movement of the 17th century, though there was no formal colony. The British had not really created the colony at that time, but this is when the British, Portuguese, and Dutch were trying to take over. And as a regional power, he rose beyond these, as well as the Mughal rule that was there, beyond the imperial rule, which was all coming from foreign lands. And he said it is us as the locals, people, that should rule. So it's really, if we look at the notion of self-rule, which currently is relevant even globally in the post-colonial context, that is what gives it the value at the global level today. But of course, when we are looking at the local situation, then it is the strong association which drives the community to still take care of the fort. And we need to understand that this value is something, whether it's recognized or not anywhere, it exists. It's inherent within them. And this is what will, lead them to continually, maintain the forts. Now, the challenge, of course, comes in conservation when the community gets so involved, they will do conservation. There are cases like we have the 100 Fort NGOs. So they would even say that we want to do conservation. And they would, if the forts are unattended, you said like there is a complete landscape. So where the forts are protected, we have, technical conservation being carried out with excavations. But there are a lot of smaller forts which are not attended. The community feels, oh, these need to be conserved. And they start doing it on their own as an NGO initiative. So the challenge comes in explaining to them that there is a technique, there is a traditional way of doing it, and this is how it needs to be done. So that is what currently I think we are looking at, the larger number of forts, because this is the defense network that is recognized through the 12 forts. But the commitment is not to just the 12 forts, it is to the entire network and to the additional forts. And the community at large is ready to work for all the forts. But how to marry these two, the technical conservation and the training and capacity of building of the community, to finally achieve, a more holistic approach to both conservation as well as community participation. So this is where we are, aiming to focus in terms of management. I hope I have answered it properly. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I think your answer is quite fully answer my consideration, and the local participation in this kind of larger scale landscape is very important, especially when they are still used and still management of these forts. So that's what we also want to do in my own case. My own case is about the Cold War military heritage, and we will also try to find out how to engage local people. So your experience will be important to us to understand. Thank you very much. So finally, is I want to ask Professor Torres. Thanks for sharing the information of the legal system and the administration and the tourism in the Manila walled city. So from your background, the history, profession point of view, how can the tourism more contribute to the understanding of the history and the crisis of the conservation? Since you are mentioning lots of the crisis and the problem in the conservation and the understanding. So is there some ways or your idea about the tourism and the combination with the history and the conservation?
Well, in the present times, we are slowly pushing towards a heritage tourism. because the original tourism plan for not only Manila but also for the entire Philippines was beaches. Tourism in the Philippines is beaches, but slowly we are still trying to make heritage sites important. It's some place to visit, that it is a place where you see the identity of the Filipinos. But of course, it is not just only looking at the place, but try to making the place alive for the tourists. For one thing, we do not the Intramuros administration nowadays try to focus much on heritage dishes in the serving of the cuisine here in Intramuros. Okay, fast food is limited, of course, to the outskirts of the city, but in the interior, many of the cafes and the restaurants try to at least cater much into Filipino cuisine. Okay, the tourist areas, there are some limitations with regards to what can be sold there, or what type of restaurants can be put there. Okay. At the same time, there are also tourist programs that would entertain tourists in showing, okay, the how culture can come alive in the walled city. There are programs in which shows that are related to, for example, in Casa Manila, what was life like during the 19th century. There are limited shows on this, and of course, as much as possible, okay, tourists are guided towards pedestrian areas. So there's a certain point in time. I think this is also done in Indonesia at certain times, that one major street is only for pedestrians. Vehicles are not allowed. Okay? And this is of course centered on many of the areas that had been restored, and hopefully, no. Although of course people sometimes are lazy in walking, but as much as possible, it is something that would hopefully, so far it's working for making the tourists, both local and foreign tourists, appreciate, appreciate the what is there, what can Intramuros can offer. Okay. I hope that a remedy could be done. Okay. We have been trying to nominate Intramuros in ICOMOS for so long a time. We've been trying to have it nominated as a National Heritage Site, now as a World Heritage Site. Unfortunately, the destruction of the war that led to many of the modernization has put a certain limit, with regards to declaring the city itself as a World Heritage Site. The churches, one of the churches in Intramuros, San Agustin, is a World Heritage Site. It's a World Heritage building. But unfortunately, the city itself, as a district, we have failed for, like, I think we tried at least 4 times already to have it listed with the World Heritage Site, but we kept failing because modernization has already spread throughout that area. Okay, thank you. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. I think the nomination of a World Heritage is a long way. Since we are trying to make the dossier of my project, I know it needs a lot of work. So I say it's just like the elected the best student in. But the best student, you need a good work, and you have to prepare very well, and you need to collect all of information to prove the value, and then you need to prove how you can management. So that's a very great work to do so. So I hope one day we can see the Manila become a new World Heritage of the Manila city. Thank you for your contribution, and thank you for your answer. I think 我想我们的这个今天的
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you so much for sharing your expertise, opinions, and valuable experiences with all of us. We have come to the end of today's webinar. I would like to give my special thanks to all of you, including all the distinguished speakers, discussants, panelists, and each member of the audience for engaging in such a meaningful dialogue. Looking into the future, we hope to host more webinars like today. And I would like to remind you before we end that we will be uploading a link and a QR code to an online survey. Please complete the survey questions.
And the comment, we hope we can have a more fruitful conversation in the future. Thank you very much.